You're listening to Rafa Said It Here, a podcast about spirituality, mental and emotional health, and the real stories of everyday people finding their way back to themselves. I am Rafaela Silva. Welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rafa Said It Here. My name is Rafaela Silva, and I'm excited that you're here joining me for another episode of my podcast. Um, I am recording today without video. I just wanted to quickly, I wouldn't even say that's quickly. It's actually a full episode, you guys. But I wanted to do this episode because I just wanted to have a conversation with you guys. I want to do a couple of things. I want to share a very personal thing, something that's very personal to me, but also set the stage to an upcoming podcast interview that I have this week with Josh from Help Me Find Me, which is a nonprofit organization based out of the UK that brings awareness to borderline personality disorder, BPD, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. My personal experience with borderline personality disorder. So I wanted to do that so that because what Josh and I are going to be talking about, it's um, more on the receiving end. Like he's going to be sharing his experience being on the receiving end with knowing someone that had borderline personality disorder. And I want to share my personal experience with it. Um, the day that I discovered and what it's like to live with borderline personality disorder. So that you guys can get the both sides of the coin. Um, so what I'm going to share today is three parts. Um, one is I want to talk about. I'm going to go back in time a little bit and share my mental health trajectory, the importance of c- becoming self-aware. I think that's the best way I can put it. The importance of becoming self-aware when it comes to your mental health. When did I suspect that it was borderline personality disorder? I'll share that story with you guys. And then I'll go over with you the traits of borderline personality disorder and share my own personal experience with each trait. Um, like I always like to say, let's get right into it. So I will start with in the middle. I'll start with when I suspected that it was borderline personality disorder. And just to a disclaimer in here, during the time that I suspected, I was also in school for behavioral health science. So I had I was not familiar with all of it, but I already knew what borderline personality disorder was. I already knew what bipolar disorder was and narcissistic personality disorder. I had the awareness of these different diagnoses, okay? So I just wanted to give you guys that. But the day that I suspected that what I was dealing with was borderline personality disorder, it was because of um an incident that happened. I had met someone that I was talking to mostly online. It was a romantic interest, and we were talking for a while, and some months in, and he made a comment to me. He used a terminology actually that triggered me. And he didn't say anything wrong. He didn't say anything abusive. It was none of those. It was just a choice of word that he used that a lot of people in a certain region of the world actually uses. And the reason I'm speaking this way, guys, because I don't want to disclose anything. So when he used this word, which was a very typical word that they use in that particular part of the world, it triggers something in me. And the reason why it triggered me was because the only person that I knew that used to use that terminology was someone that was very abusive to me. So the issue wasn't that in itself. The issue was what happened after I got triggered, which is one of the traits that I'm going to be discussing with you guys today. I went into a state of paranoia. And I'm not talking about the paranoia that a lot of people have when they feel nervous or scared or, like they're trying to protect themselves. It is part of it is, yes, is there. But what happens to the brain of someone that has borderline personality disorder is that we go into what's called a temporary psychosis, right? Meaning it's not a full psychosis that you would see with someone that has like schizophrenia, for example, but it's a temporary psychosis. And what that is within that time frame that we're experiencing that, um, whatever it is that we're imagining to be that we're imagining, we believe that to be true, meaning it is happening. It's not like, oh, I'm just trying to be cautious. No, it is true. That is who that person is, right? So it's called a temporary psychosis. And so um that lasted for a good half of, I would say maybe a good couple of hours. And what's happened in the moment is I'm believing that to be true. So now I'm trying to figure out, okay, I need to protect myself. I need to keep myself safe because now I believe that to be true. That means now I got to do something to protect myself, right? So that paralyzed me for a good maybe 3 hours, you guys, to the point where I sat down. I was exhausted, and I sat down. I was in the kitchen that day, and I sat down on a chair because my body was just so exhausted of trying to figure out how I'm going to now protect myself from something that is not true, but in my mind, the temporary psychosis created it to be true. And so when I sat down, and I'll mention this, and this is not the psychosis, okay, you guys? Because there's a spiritual side to all of this, and I wanna talk about it maybe in a third after Josh and I sit down, I'll talk about this in a third podcast, but the moment that I sat down, I literally heard, "Whoa, slow down, girl," and I sat down, and I said and you know how I felt like I blinked for a moment. Like, it's almost as if I traveled somewhere and I just came back to life. And at that moment that I heard, "Whoa, slow down, girl," I also heard, "Who said that to you? Like, who told you that that's true? Who told you that this is reality? Like, who told you that?" And I had to slow down. I started crying because I knew at that moment that something was not okay. And so, again, as I mentioned before, because I had the awareness of different types of diagnosis, it led me to the first thing that came to my mind was, I think this could be borderline personality disorder. So I went to look it up. I went to look at the traits just to kind of compare to see if, because until that moment, it wasn't on my radar at all, even though I was familiar with it. But I also was familiar with bipolar disorder, which is not the same thing, okay? But sometimes people sometimes confused with it, right? So I went to look up borderline personality disorder and I looked at all the traits. And when I looked at all the traits, I said, there it is. That's the issue. So after that, I spoke with a clinical psychologist and she said, who knew me for a while. And she says, I suspected it. That's what it could be. I had that suspicion. And then I also spoke with my one of my previous therapists who was also a clinical psychologist. And she says, I thought about the same thing. And it's interesting because and let me just say this just so you guys know, like, oh, what do you mean? They both clinical psychologists know this. So the thing about and we'll talk about this borderline personality disorder is that um when we talk to a psychologist, we might be experiencing different things. And sometimes when we go to see a therapist, we're talking about the issues that we're having that week or that moment, right? Um, and here's why and this is why I spoke in the beginning the importance of self-awareness. Having a journal, writing down different things. Because when we go see a therapist, we're not bringing all of this to the therapist. We're bringing the effects of things that happen in our life. In other words, what do I mean by that? Oh, however I behaved, it impacted a relationship, it impacted the workforce, or we're dealing with past trauma from our family. So sometimes it takes a while for a clinical psychologist to determine a particular diagnosis, right? We don't sometimes right off the bat, oh, this is what someone has, unless you're very specific and say, I'm hearing voices, and that's a different story. But especially in my case, where I had quiet borderline personality disorder, which we're going to talk about in just a second as well. Um, and so when I got that, I said, okay, I felt relieved. That was my first bar. Like, I felt relieved because now that I know, I can take care of myself differently. I can figure out ways to heal or whatever is necessary for me to be with that, right? Um, but what I wasn't anticipating is how people viewed borderline personality disorder. And I made the silly mistake of going online on social media and because I thought, "Oh my god, let me go look at support groups or people that are dealing with the same thing that I'm dealing." OMG, I ran out. I'm telling you, I hid it because what I saw was heartbreaking, and I didn't want anybody to know that I had borderline personality disorder. As a matter of fact, I didn't talk about it until last year on my Instagram because I did an interview about adverse childhood experience with someone, and that came out on the interview. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to let the world know at this point. But I held it for years because of the stigma that he has. And that's why I'm very excited about having this conversation with Josh this week so we can really get into it, into what it really means well, one, what is to have BPD in my case, and two, what is it like to live with someone that has borderline personality disorder to get his point of view, his experience. But going back to the diagnosis, um, I said, I need to understand this. I need to figure out what this is and how to live with it. Um, but my fear of sharing with the world was immense. Like there were days that I even went into denial, to be honest with you guys. Like I said, no, I think I just went into a full denial. I said to myself, what if I tell myself I don't have it and I don't have it, right? But no, because the symptoms, the traits are going to show up whether you want to or not. As a matter of fact, when I began to go down the rabbit hole of some things that have happened in my life, I realized that I was having these traits since I was 14 years old. I was able to go back in time and see where all those things showed up, right? So that's why it's important to have self-awareness, to know like, okay, something is not okay, something is off. Let me write stuff down. Let me write patterns down. Let me write behaviors down so that when you do decide to get help or go see a therapist, you have this list of things and they can quickly figure out, okay, let's, do some testing or whatever it is they need to do, depending on what it is they find out, of course, to determine the best course of action. So before we talk about um, the traits, I just want to give you um, the definition of borderline personality disorder and also first I want to give you the definitions, what causes BPD, and also the four types of BPD. And then I'll talk about the traits of the nine traits of APD and how they show up in my life. Um, and then go from there. Okay. So, in those of you that are listening that might have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, because one of the things that I also noticed that in a lot of people is that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, they got the diagnosis and they just left it at that, right? They didn't go into what it means to have it. I know some people that has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and they don't even know what the traits are. And so it's important. It's important to know, it's important to understand so that you can know when something happens, you're like, oh, this is what's happened. This was what's going on. And you can learn how to deal with it. And I'll talk about a little bit at the end, some ways that some types of therapies that has helped me and that can help you to deal with these traits, to deal with the triggers and what comes with it. Okay. So, borderline personality disorder is a personality disorder, like I mentioned. It's noted in DSM 5, which is the diagnostics book that clinical psychologists use. Um, It states that those with BPD often struggle with unstable relationships, a fear of abandonment, impulsive behavior, and intense emotions like sudden anger or anxiety. About 1.4 to 2.7% adults in the US will experience BPD in their lifetime. Diagnosis typically occurs when an individual shows significant changes in self image, acts impulsively, and has a history of turbulent relationships requiring at least five specific symptoms. So, in order for you to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, you have to have at least five out of the nine traits. I had all nine, you guys. What causes BPD? So borderline personality disorder does not have a single cause. It typically arises from a combination or of factors, including genetics, what you inherit from your family, which I'll talk a little bit about that as well. The chemistry and structure of your brain and your life experiences. Life experience especially includes stressful or traumatic events during childhood, such as abuse, neglect, or unstable family environment. Together, these factors can increase the likelihood of developing BPD. And I just want to add really quick here before I talk about the four types. One of the things that also impacts the development of BPD, the possibility, let's just say, of the development of BPD is your adverse childhood experience, also known as ACE, like your ACE score. I had my ACEs done last year, and it's 10. It's 10 or 11 questions. And it is known that at least I would say about 40 something percent of people in the US have at least one ACE score, like is one out of 10. And if you have four or five, it's considered to be high, like extremely high. They say that people that have four or five ACE score, they are more susceptible to committing suicide. Now, when I did mine, I was shocked. I had 10 out of 10. And so, it explained a lot as a lot of things that I was dealing with. And of course, it explained also, it even brought more clarity into my borderline personality disorder. So, just wanted to add that there. I won't be talking about ACEs today because I do want to bring someone on to talk about ACEs who is a ACE. The I call her the voice of ACEs, and I'm gonna have her on next month so you guys can learn about ACEs and get your score and all of that good stuff, okay? So back to the 4 types of BPD. So these are not on the DSM-5. These are just some of the, experts in the field of borderline personality disorder. They talk about these different 4 types, and I'm so happy, I'm tell you guys that they talk about these 4 types because what I noticed that a lot of people are angry towards people that have borderline personality disorder because of a particular type that is what I like to call the outward, right, type. Because when I was reading about 'em, like, "What do you mean? I'm not that person. I'm not that person." And then I kept saying that, right? But I realized that I am that person, but just not towards the world, but rather towards myself, and I'll talk about what that is. So, people with borderline personality disorder we don't look the same, you guys. So, that's why they talk about the 4 different types. So, the number 1, not when I say number 1, it's not a particular top or it's just one. Um, it's impulsive type. So these are the folks that act on impulse. They take risk and sometimes get aggressive or reckless. So I thought it was interesting because when I think about impulsive type, right, it reminds me of a trait that people that has bipolar disorder have, right? They act on impulse when they're in that manic state. And so I think that's why sometimes uh people can get misdiagnosed or they confuse it with bipolar disorder because of the impulsive type of BPD. The second one, which is I think the one that everybody gets angry and upset, is the petulant type, right? This is the one about the mood swings, being moody, stubborn, or easily irritated. So they're angry. And as I begin to talk about the traits, you're gonna see each of them described on these 4 types. And also, we are all of these, right? Like we do have impulsive, we do take risk, but there are certain types that does more of these traits more than the others. I guess that's what I want to be able to clarify, right? So in other words, let me just go over the 4 types and I'll talk about it a little bit more, okay? The third one is the discouraged type, or also known as the quiet type. This is the one that I have. Okay. Here, people feel down, depend a lot on others, and struggle with low self worth. Okay. But what you're also going to find out is that this discouraged type also do risk behavior. They also have mood swings. We also stubborn. We also get irritated. But the difference is we do that all towards ourselves, towards the self, right? And last but not least, the self-destructive type. This type hurts themselves, feels hopeless, or carries a lot of pain inside. Um, so here's the thing, you guys. These 4 types, they're all borderline personality disorder. Now, in certain people, certain traits, they are more prominent than the other. And that's why the 4 types are created because we're all different, right? So like in my case, do I have the do I have the self-destructive type? I do. Do I have the petulant? I do. Do I have, the impulsive? I do. But it's all towards me. It's quiet, not towards the outside world, right? So if I was to identify, I would say we're 2, either outwardly or inwardly, right? So I would say the 2 types would be discouraged and petulant. And we are all of those, but we either that towards other people or we that towards ourselves. Um, so like I mentioned, they're not official medical categories, but more like how some therapists make sense of the different ways that BPD shows up in people's lives. So talk about the traits of BPD so you can kind of get an idea um of what it what it looks like in real life. Like, what does that mean, right? So the first one is fear of abandonment, and I'll share the clinical um, definition, why it happens, and I'll give you guys maybe a story of how it shows up in my life, like in real time. So fear of abandonment is a deep fear of being left or rejected, often leading to intense efforts to avoid real or perceived abandonment. Why does it happen? It's often rooted in early childhood instability or loss of emotional safety. Um, so the way that it shows up in my life, right? So we have this deep fear of being left or rejected, and often leading to intense efforts to avoid. So we try to do everything to avoid real perceived abandonment. Um, and is often rooted in early childhood instability or loss of emotional safety. So just to give you guys a little bit of background in my story, um, my rejection began at the womb. Um, my mother tried to abort me twice, wasn't successful. And after I was born, I went to live with my grandparents. So I began to suffer those two things very, very early on. Um, and there was a lot of neglect as a child as well when I was a kid. And so the way that it shows up in my life, like the way that fear of abandonment shows up in my life. So, let's say, for example, um, I sent a message to someone and that person doesn't text me back or doesn't call me back, whatever the situation may be. And I'm not talking about going days without calling back. I'm talking about it could be within a few minutes, right? Let's say, for example, I'm having a conversation with you. We're texting back and forth. We're texting back and forth. And all of a sudden I text you something. And then 5 minutes goes by and we don't get a text back. Our bodies our the way our brains are wired at that moment, we don't have like, oh, maybe he or she got busy. No, all of a sudden you think, did I say something wrong? Did I say something that hurt that person's feeling? Like we go into this parentless, this state of trying to figure out, like we start tracing our steps back, right? Because there's a perception that somehow we did something wrong and that person is going to abandon us or that person is no longer going to be your friend or that person doesn't like you anymore, right? And so the way that our brains are perceiving it, we are believing it to be true. Okay. So it's not like, people say, oh, it's something. No, it's how the brain becomes wired. Okay. The second one is unstable relationships. And the clinical definition is intense, is stormy relationships that swing between idealization and evaluation, deep connection followed by conflict or withdrawal. Why does it happen? As a kid, we never really learned what safe love looked like. So our nervous system is always bracing for loss or rejection. So this is also what we call splitting, right? So as a kid, you were raised perhaps with someone that one minute they love you, the next minute they are doing the opposite of what of what they say they were. So there's a lot of confusion between what safe love is. And love a lot of times tended to be conditional. If you didn't do this that way, therefore I'm not going to give you my love. So there's a lot of confusion as you grow up between the person that's supposed to love you also hurt you. So there's a little split in your brain. So the way that it shows up um, in a person that has borderline personality disorder is no relationship is safe. No relationship is safe, whether it be romantic, whether it be friends. There is no safe relationship because our brains were wired to, to always expect things to change and within a split of a second. So we're always hyper vigilant, okay? Because we don't know if any given moment you're going to change. And so the splitting is already in our mind. So the moment we perceive that something is wrong, all of a sudden there's a shift, a split in our brain. So let me give you an example. So let's say that let me bring back the example of the texting, right? So let's say we were texting back and forth. I said something and I didn't get a response back. So there's this oh my gosh, did I say something wrong? Did I do something wrong? And then all of a sudden you go from us loving you to us hating you because now we're trying to keep ourselves safe, right? So it looks like this. So let's say we're talking and I think you're a wonderful person. I think you're like the best human ever existed. We tend to idolize, have this, we tend to idolize that, right? And the moment that you didn't text us back, maybe took 5 or 10 minutes, all of a sudden we're creating a different story, a different narrative about you. We begin to look for fault, begin to look for something that's wrong within you so that we can now hate you. And therefore, now that we hate you, guess what? We don't have to be with you, right? So we call that splitting. They call it unstable relationship. It's really we call splitting. And that's because we learned early on that love was conditional. And let me tell you guys, splitting is one of the hardest. Not all of them are hard, to be honest, but splitting is really taxing on the brain. When I have episodes of splitting, it's really hard. It's really, really, really hard because we go. It's almost like we're in a what do you call it? What's that thing that we do in the amusement park? It's a roller coaster. It's one of those dips, like it dips so like it drops, right? And it's hard because when we realize that it was nothing. And then I'll talk about how all these traits they connect to each other, right? But it's one that is really, really taxing on the mind and on the body. The third one is unstable self-image. Clinical definition is a shifting sense of self, feeling unsure of who you are, what you value, or what you want. Why does it happen? We had to do a lot of shape shifting to survive. We had to constantly adapt to be loved, to stay safe. Um, you know, and I was, so my mother, both my mother and my grandmother, they both have, well, my grandmother had because she's no longer with us here in the physical, but undiagnosed covert narcissistic personality disorder, and my mother has um, overt, which is the flamboyant or what the narcissistic personality disorder that most people know. Now, both of these are undiagnosed, you guys, meaning they never went into a therapist because that would be very hard to do. Um, but I had a friend that understood what it was many, many years ago before I was even diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. We knew that my mother had narcissistic personality disorder, but is undiagnosed. Okay, I just wanted to, um, but they all showcase all the traits of a person that would have been diagnosed with NPD. And because of it, um, I didn't have a say on what it is, like what I wanted, my own. Every time I tried to live out my personality, it was often met with punishment. It was met with disdain. It was met with ridicule. I didn't make any decisions on what I wore, what I was going to wear, or if I did choose something that I was going to wear. It was often discouraged. Being myself was discouraged. I was discouraged of being myself. And sometimes, you know, when I was allowed to showcase myself, it was because so that she could get or they could get some sort of praise, but then it will be demolished the moment we were in the house. So in public was okay, but in the house wasn't okay. So there was this constantly we had to shape shift or become something that is not ourselves in order to at least feel like, okay, I'm safe, I am loved if I just act a particular way. So as we get older, our self-image is very unstable, right? We're very unsure of ourselves um, because we're told who we are and not valued for what we really are. We're told, like, this is who you should be. So as we get older, our sense of self is like, I don't even know what that is. Like, what does that even mean? So it's a very unstable self-image. So the tendency with borderline personality disorder is to go into very codependent relationships because we're trying to find our sense of self and we don't know that the way that we discover it is going within. We think it's out there because it was always out there, right? Because it was given to us. We were told what it is. And a lot of the times we had to be that way because we needed to survive. And we didn't know what love was. And to us, if we do whatever they say to do, then that's what love is, right? So that's the third trait. And the way that shows up, as I mentioned, like we tend to go into these relationships where um whatever you say is okay, that's what you want, and that's what I'll do, right? We're constantly changing our looks because we're so insecure, unsure of ourselves. We're changing things that we do. One minute we want to do XYZ, another minute we want to do something different because we're looking for that connection to ourselves and we think that we're going to find it outside of ourselves. The fourth trait is impulsivity, being impulsive, acting quickly in risky or self harming ways, like spending a lot of money, sex, substance. It happens because impulsivity often masks pain and is used as a quick escape from emotional overload. I know for me, you guys, one of the things that my impulsivity a lot of times were spending or making decisions that is like, oh, I'm going to move to the state and I just get up and go, right? Because I'm trying to calm the nervous system because either something triggered me, um, and I need to escape. So a lot of people can sometimes define this as a flight response, a flight trauma response. So I don't, a lot now I do, okay, but back when I didn't know what was going on, I didn't think about anything. I just did. Whatever I wanted to do, I went and did it. Like I didn't think things through. Okay. And that's because I was trying to escape whatever I was feeling, whatever triggered me that caused impulsivity. So let's say, let me give you another example, a personal example. So I got an email the other day, and and it triggered me. My first response is I begin to act quickly, even though there was no need for me to act quickly. But in my mind, like I was given a few months to deal with something, right? But in my mind, I felt that those months became days. And I began to act quickly because my body is like, nope. Because to me, there's a threat that's taking place, right? And so I needed to remove myself from the threat or the perceived threat that I created in my own mind. And so it caused me to do impulsive things. It caused me to call people that I shouldn't have been calling to have specific conversations. And I'm like, why did I talk about this? You know what I mean? But it's that impulsivity that sometimes happen. Okay. Um, so I did mention this earlier as part of unstable relationships, but I want to talk about this just in itself, which is splitting, right? The rapid mood shifts triggered by even minor events. Why it happens, growing up without emotional modeling leaves you unequipped to regulate your inner world. So, you know, yes, the conversation around mental health, I know it's new for a lot of people. And back in the days, our parents weren't talking about emotional regulation or like those terminology. We didn't have language for it. Even though those things did exist, we didn't have language for it. And a lot of our parents didn't know how to do that. And so, um, we didn't have anything to model after, right? We don't know how to regulate because splitting happens because we're trying to regulate our nervous system and we don't know how. So we need to keep the body saying, you're not safe. You're not safe. So we need to create some sort of safety. And splitting is one of those things that creates a false sense of safety. But it causes that damage, especially when it comes to relationships. Okay. The sixth one is the sixth trait is chronic emptiness. And this is one also that I really, really challenge is a challenge for me. Okay. And that is a persistence feeling of void or inner numbness. Why does it happen? Long term suppression of identity and desire makes it hard to feel grounded. This is the one that I have the most challenge, guys. Not just when something happens, but even when it comes to faith, like, when something is going on, when I feel that the rug has been pulled from up under my feet, um, I blank out. I literally blank out. Like, I forget. Like, let's say yesterday I had I had this assurance of who I am. And if something happens that threatens my basic needs or my basic security, my basic what I need in terms of my basics, I literally blank out. Like everything that I was sure of working on, it stops and I go into this really, really deep hole. And I just forget. Like I literally forget who I am, what I want. Um, it's almost like nothing ever even existed. It's a really scary feeling sometimes, that leads to our ninth trait, which I won't get there yet. I'm still on the sixth, right? But I'll talk about what the chronic emptiness can lead into. The seventh trait is the one that also is a challenge for me, and I'm learning to really deal with it because this trait. This trait is the one that I suppress the most because, again, remember, I have quiet BPD, so I don't. This particular trait is 99.9% directed towards myself, and that is intense anger. So clinical definition, difficulty regulating anger, explosive or disproportionate to the situation. So it could be something small, but the anger is like massive, right? Why it happens? Years of suppression or injustice create internal pressure that erupts when ignored. So never been able to express yourself. And if you were raised by in a household where people are yelling, they're angry, and they're constantly shutting you up, can't cry. Like I remember when I was young, say, swallow your tears. I was also molested as a child. So I carry a lot of anger inside. But the anger that I carry inside, it's a lot of it is directed towards myself. Which is very dangerous, you guys, because when you hold this much anger in your body, it can cause a lot of autoimmune disease. So you have to be very careful. I had to be very careful. And I had to learn to find ways to regulate that by sometimes punching a pillow or punching the water. But the thing about my anger is I hold on to a lot. I hold on to a lot of anger because in my world, in my heart, I'm a loving person. And I always felt that if I am angry, I'm doing something wrong. And I just recently started to acknowledge my anger as sacred. And when I'm angry, I acknowledge now that I'm angry. I do things so that I can process this anger, but I'm no longer allowing it to live within me. I sometimes write on my journal. I talked about this, I think, last week or the week before, like having a FU journal, because we have to get this anger out. And so, one of the things that one of the challenges with BPD is intense anger. Number 8, which is which is the trait that led me to suspect that I was dealing with BPD, and it's called paranoia or sometimes disassociation. And what happens during these states is, like I said, it's a temporary psychosis, right? So the clinical definition is suspicion of others of feeling disconnected from self reality, especially under stress. Why it happens? Your body mind split to protect you from trauma. So because I went through a lot of abuse as a child, molested, there was also the environment that I lived in, which was around gangs and shootings and poverty, and there were so many uncertains. There was so many, like, every day was something different. Your body goes into a temporary psychosis, right? So if something happens that could suspect that those things are happening again, that's that little temporary psychosis, paranoia. We just associate, like, we come out of ourselves. You've heard people say the souls leave their bodies. It's kind of like that. Um, and but it's what led me to say, okay, hold on, girl, let's take a look at this. And it's one that I used to deal with this one for sometimes weeks at a time. Now, sometimes it will show up, and now it will last about, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. So I'm very happy that because I brought so much awareness into what's going on with me, I can quickly now say, "Oh, up, 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 up," you know, come back to reality. And then I'll talk about a little bit how to a couple of things that I do as a what do you call it? As a preventive measure that has helped me minimize this trait from sometimes that will go on for weeks at a time to now 15 minutes. And last one is the ones that is the scariest one. It is suicidal thoughts or self harm, or most people say suicidal ideation, right? Or SI. Um, Clinical definition is persistent thoughts of dying or engaging self injury to cope. Why it happens? When emotional pain feels unbearable and no one sees you, the body seeks escape. And this is a tough one, you guys, because what happens during this moment of suicidal ideation is, so it's not like we want to go. It's let me try to explain. Yes and no. We want to go because somehow whatever might be happening at that moment might be it's so hard on the body. Let me just explain what is going on in the body. Think of an unbearable physical pain. Think of it like someone just plugged you on the wall and you're getting electrocuted. The pain that we're dealing with physically, it's so intense, but so intense that the only thing that comes to mind at that moment is to go. Like, you know what? But it's not like, "Oh, I'm in so much pain, I wanna go." I'm just talking my experience. I can't This is not everybody experience, okay? This is just my personal one. Um, the pain makes you think about two things, at least for me. Everything that you have done, like I have done this, I've done this, I've done that. And you begin to look at life and you begin to see a lot of the same. So let me give you an example. So let's say it's kind of like you're born, you go to work, you do XYZ, whatever enjoyments of life, right? And you die, right? So we look at I look at cycles of life. And I begin to think about, well, what's the purpose? What was the point, right? Because if we're looking at cycles of life, then we know that even if we get into a better place in life, there's no guarantee that we will go through something these things again. So what happens with with SI is that the way that we get to the point where like, okay, I don't think I want to continue is because we are processing like at least for me, I'm processing cycles of life in addition to feeling that physical pain. So it's almost like, man, if I go, it will be a relief, right? Um, and trust me, the thought of it in itself brings some sort of relief to the body at the moment because we're saying if we go, then we don't have to feel this pain anymore. We don't have to feel because it's a physical pain. It's a physical pain and it's a psychological torment. We want to end both. So when we begin to have the ideation, the SI, the SI in itself brings some sort of relief to the body and to the torment. And I'm not saying this is something that one should consider doing. I'm just trying to give you guys a peek inside as to why it happens, as to why it's there, why it exists. But here's the thing, and I want you guys who have borderline personality disorder or anybody who has thought about it or suicidal ideation, here's what I want to say to you. It is a temporary thing. It's just like anything else that passes through. It's passing through our bodies. And then when it's over, like when it's finally over, this thing, like the pain is gone. And then something really great happens in our lives. At least for me, this is what I began to understand. And I said, wow, I'm so glad that I'm still here because I got to experience this. Because we don't know all the greatness that we're going to get to experience as we continue on this journey. And when I say this, even my eyes get a little bit watery because this one is a hard one because it's there when life becomes very painful. And in that moment, nothing else exists but that. Like nothing else exists but that. But what I have learned to tell myself is it's going to pass. And when it does pass, like sometimes I'm like, Dak, I had that thought, and when it passes and then something happens where you get to experience something in your life and you become really grateful and say, oh, I'm glad I'm still here because I got to see this. Had I really you know, had I thought about doing what I thought was going to do, I wouldn't be able to experience this thing that I would have never thought I could experience. So I just wanted to give you guys an inside look. And if you are experiencing um, thoughts of SI, please call 988. I have called them and they're amazing. They're great. And I definitely make sure you guys have that saved on your phone. Okay. Um, so those are the 9 traits, you guys. I just gave you some an inside look into the world of beauty. This is just part one. There's a lot more I think I can talk about when it comes to dealing with borderline personality disorder. Um, If you guys have any questions or if you want me to talk about any of the traits just a little bit more, because I didn't want to make this extra long, and I can give you guys also in a different episode. Maybe I can talk about each trait separately, because I have lots of stories for each trait, like actual stories, things that happen, and how that trait showed up in my life. And also, one of the things that makes borderline personality disorder so complex is that I always call it like each trait is like a thread. You pull one thread and you pull on the other thread. Like if you pull one thread, you pull them all, right? So the thing about borderline personality disorder is that if one happens, all of them are happening, right? If there's a fear of abandonment, then the fear of abandonment will trigger another trait. It would trigger the splitting, the unstable relationship. It would trigger the self im like they're interconnected, and that's what makes this disorder so complex. And one of the things that we're trying to avoid in at all costs is that number 9 trait, which is suicide ideation. So, like I said, all of them sometimes are happening. Sometimes it's just one trait, but sometimes it's all of them all at the same time, which then induces the ninth trait. It is a very challenging um, disorder to live with. I will tell you that. A lot of people don't understand. I am sure some of our behaviors have hurt people. I am 100% aware of that. But I think me bringing awareness and sharing with others um, has allowed for a lot of people to understand my world. But here's two things I want to say. I want to speak to three different people now. First, I want to talk to, and I'll talk about more. I will talk this more with Josh this week. Is for those people that are like, if you have a friend or family member that has shared with you, like, I'm dealing with borderline personality disorder. One of the things that I want to be able to ask and really advocate and uh I'm not even sure what word to use, but learn about what it is. You want to support someone that has borderline personality disorder, understand what it is, understand the traits. Um, Josh is, we're going to talk a little bit more about this on this week, but this is what we ask of you. Understand what it is. If you know someone that has borderline personality disorder, a friend or family member, please understand, try to understand their world, what it means. Number two, I want to talk to, those that are been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, but have not learned about what it is that you're dealing with. Please do some research, figure out which type you are, begin to work through some of these things that you're dealing with, begin to process some of the trauma, look for trauma specialists, therapists, because they're going to be the one that's going to be able to help you. Also, look for therapists that deals with dialect behavioral therapy. It's very important because the things that we're dealing with requires a specific type of therapy. So DBT, dialect behavioral therapy, is really good for borderline personality disorder. Last but not least, another thing that has helped me over the years is meditation. Create like a corner in your house. I particularly have an altar, but sitting down in meditation, humming, creating that vibration in your body, you guys, it has been life changing for me. And the reason why meditation is so powerful is because it allows you to be with you on the here and now. And a lot of the things that I think, especially with the temporary psychosis, the paranoia, when you begin to create that self-awareness, you begin to have you begin to look at your thoughts as an observer as opposed to being at the mercy of them, right? So that paranoia, that temporary psychosis gets much better because now you're looking at your thoughts and you're like, wait, that's not real. That's not a reality. You begin to understand the difference between reality and the psychosis, the paranoia. And that begins to shift. That creates a shift. And so meditation has the power to slow things down. You learn to become an observer of your thoughts so that when you do get triggered, you don't spend weeks and weeks believing something to be real when it's not, okay? So I definitely recommend that as a form of therapy. I will talk more about this, you guys. I don't want to make this episode super long. I think I already went super long. Uh, but I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more this week with Josh, that is going to be on the receiving end and all the work that he's doing with his organization. And then I can come back and maybe talk about the different traits. Maybe I'll do the different traits as a weekly tidbit. And then I definitely want to touch bases when it comes to borderline personality disorder and and spiritual health. Okay. You guys, thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment on either YouTube, Spotify. If you want to send me a message directly, you can do so on my Instagram at I am Rafaela Silva or A New Life School or Rafa Silva. I'm sorry, Rafa Said It Here podcast. It's a new Instagram, you guys. Uh, that is also on Instagram. Okay. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of Rafa Said It Here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you can get notification of my latest episode. Sending you love.